Welcome to Jesus Changes Everything, a daily podcast dedicated to providing a fresh look at the ancient and glorious truth that Jesus not only reigns, but is busy about the business of bringing all things under subjection, that celebrates the wonder and the glory that he has been given all authority in heaven and on earth. It's time once again for Ism Tuesday, and I've got an ism for you today that probably is not one that's tempting you to embrace it, may not be having much of an influence on you at all, but I think it's interesting for what it tells us about ourselves. And to get to it, I have to take you back to first high school and then college. I was in high school, and I was a reader. I read anything I could get my hands on, and sometimes the books that I could get my hands on were not books I was supposed to get my hands on. I remember a day when I was alone in a classroom at my high school, and there was a cupboard in the classroom, and I opened the cupboard, and inside that cupboard was a stack of novels. Not a bunch of different novels, but multiple copies of the same novel. And it was short and had a bright cover, and thought, I'll give this a try. So I picked out that copy and took it home and read it. The book was called Cat's Cradle, and the author was Kurt Vonnegut. Kurt Vonnegut was, in my judgment, just incredibly adept at the rhythms of writing and of dialogue, and I ended up reading 20 or 30 different novels that he has written. His worldview's way out of whack, but boy, he could turn a phrase. So I mentioned Cat's Cradle because in that story, I don't remember a whole lot about it, but I remember a kind of subplot, that there's a part of the story that is set in a Caribbean island. And on this Caribbean island, there is a titanic struggle going on between the police forces and this sort of mystical religious leader. And eventually, and here comes a spoiler alert, eventually we discover that the chief of police and the mystical religious leader were actually in cahoots together, that their whole battle was just a ruse designed to work out for their advantage one way or another, to present the other as the enemy and them as the hero. And it's very much 1984-like with we're at war with Eurasia, we've never been at war with East Asia, that kind of thing. Well, I thought that was strange. And then fast forward a few years, and I'm in college now. And a friend and I are in a record store. Those of you who don't know what a record store is, ask your grandparents. We're in this record store, and I've got a pretty significant record collection. Not massive, but pretty significant. But I was completely, I had nothing like this that I bought that day. I bought a record by UB40 called Little Bag of Rhythm. And my friend that was with me bought a Bob Marley record, and I listened to both of them. It was my introduction to reggae. And reggae was something I discovered that I really enjoyed, and I started expanding that collection until I had lots and lots of reggae from lots and lots of different bands. And that led to some research and some study in the religion that undergirds reggae music, Rastafarianism. And that, friends, as we're halfway through, is what our ism is for today, Rastafarianism. Rastafarianism reminds me of Cat's Cradle for a couple of reasons. One, Cat's Cradle is set in the Caribbean, and Rastafarianism comes to us from Jamaica. Secondly, Rastafarianism, by any level-headed cool-minded examination, looks like a bad joke of a made-up religion. It doesn't have any uh, credible backstory, and in fact, it looks an awful lot like a lot of question begging. We'll start with the sacrament of Rastafarianism, which is marijuana. The consumption of marijuana is not just something that Rastafarianism leaves room for, but it's something that Rastafarianism commands. Now, I have a real trouble believing that someone, even not particularly sane, could consciously believe that God was speaking to them and saying to them, hey, this is what I want you to do in your worship of me. I want you to get high. I find it much more easy to believe that someone liked getting high and thought, hey, let's make a religion out of this. Let's just make one up. Added to that is a complicated connection between Pan-African nationalism connected with Marcus Garvey and some notion of the people of Jamaica being the lost tribe of Israel via Ethiopia and then the slave trade. Weirder still, Rastafarianism holds that the Messiah was on earth when the religion started. That particular Messiah included among his titles the Lion of the tribe of Judah, but the title he was most known as is as the Emperor of Ethiopia. Haile Selassie was considered the Messiah, and when he died, Rastafarianism posited that he would be raised again. And there are some who still think one day he'll be raised again, or that he has been raised again, that he's in hiding. Again, the whole thing looks made up to me. I'm interested in it. I enjoy the music, but it's a very thin veneer, non-existent veneer of credibility to this religion. The benefit of it, the blessing of it, for me, is it not only has encouraged the creation of this musical style that I like, but often, because of this connection to Israel, oftentimes, not often, but from time to time, reggae songs are built out of scriptural imagery, scriptural language, or even the Psalms themselves. And I appreciate that and enjoy that. So, there's your introduction to Rastafarianism. I hope you're not tempted to convert to it, but in case there's anybody out there that's in danger of that, I hope I've been some help to keep you away. We have completed our tour together through the Ten Commandments, the series that we called the Sin Stones, and remembering the glorious truth that not only is there no conflict between God's call to love and God's commandments, but that in fact the keeping of the commandments is the definitive nature of keeping the law and loving. I thought it would be good to start a new series that I call Love Is. And what we're going to do through this series is work our way through the qualities of love that Paul describes for us in what is known as the love chapter, 1 Corinthians 13. It's a very well-known chapter, read often at weddings for believers and unbelievers alike. And for this, our introductory episode on this series, I thought it would be fitting and fruitful and helpful to simply read through the chapter. I hope you will bear with me. I hope that you will find this scripture reading to be helpful. 1 Corinthians chapter 13. Though I speak with the tongues of men and of angels, but have not love, I have become sounding brass, or a clanging cymbal. And though I have the gift of prophecy, and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and though I have all faith, so that I could remove mountains, but have not love, I am nothing. And though I bestow all my goods to feed the poor, and though I give my body to be burned, but have not love, it profits me nothing. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself, is not puffed up, does not behave rudely, does not seek its own, is not provoked, thinks no evil, does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth, bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never fails. But whether there are prophecies, they will fail. Whether there are tongues, they will cease. Whether there is knowledge, it will vanish away. For we know in part, and we prophesy in part. But when that which is perfect has come, then that which is in part will be done away. When I was a child, I spoke as a child. I understood as a child. I thought as a child. But when I became a man, I put away childish things. For now we see in a mirror dimly, but then face to face. Now I know in part, but then I shall know just as I also am known. And now abide faith, hope, love. These three. But the greatest of these is love. We're all familiar, I trust, with that time when Jesus told the rich young fool that he had to sell all that he had, give it to the poor, and follow him. And probably all of us have been afraid to ask this question. Is this true for everyone who would follow Jesus? Well, the answer is yes. Now, this is typically not what we hear about this text. Often we're told, for instance, that Jesus is tapping into the first use of the law rather than the third use here. That is, that instead of telling the young man what he must do to inherit eternal life, he was instead demonstrating that despite the man's claims, he had not, in fact, kept the Ten Commandments. Jesus is saying here, well, you say you've kept the Ten Commandments. Let's take a look at Commandment 1. Do you have any gods before me? I don't know, say, money? Now, that's all true, and that's good exegesis of the text. I've got no quarrel with that approach at all. The trouble is that we then go on to comfort ourselves by thinking, well, since I'm not like this rich young fool, since I would be willing to sell all that I have and give it to the poor if Jesus asked, I passed this test. We think that he failed an actual test because he was no good, while we can pass a hypothetical test because we are good. It is, however, a very different thing to give up all your actual wealth than to merely hypothetically give it all up. Now, it's possible that money is not actually an idol in your life. It may be that if Jesus were to give you this command, you'd get right to work selling off assets. But all of us have idols, things we hold back from giving to the Lord. I discovered one idol in my own life several years ago, when God in His providence didn't ask me to give it away, but simply took it from me. I had, at that time, something of a reputation as a rather bold and prophetic fellow, someone who bravely didn't much give a thought to his reputation. That reputation very quickly morphed into a reputation as a bully and a cheat. And I learned rather quickly that I did indeed give a thought to my reputation, that I craved, that I longed for a reputation as one who didn't care about his reputation. My deceitful heart had deceived me once again. Friends, when we sign on with Jesus, we give up our wealth. We give up our reputations. We give up every gift that He had already given us, and every gift that He will give us from that moment forward. You see, when we become a part of the bride of Christ, our prenuptial agreement reads, all that I am and all that I have is yours, O Lord, from this day forth and evermore. When, therefore, He asks for anything, whether our wealth, our reputation, or whatever it may be that we cherish, we're called to confess, yes, Lord. The rich fool went away from Jesus sad, for he had great wealth. We, however, walk toward Jesus joyful, for we already had nothing. Do you have to give up your wealth? Of course. Even if the Master allows you to continue to steward it for Him. Do you have to give up your reputation? Of course. Even if the Master allows you to live in peace and quietness with all men. You and I, we have to give up everything, just like He did. And like Him, all we will receive in return. is everything.
You've been listening to the Jesus Changes Everything podcast, a production of Dunamis Fellowship, the teaching outreach of Dr. R.C. Sproul Jr. If you've enjoyed this podcast, we encourage you to subscribe, which you can do at all the usual outlets, to tell your friends, and to spread the word. To learn more about the work of Dunamis Fellowship, please visit rcsproulJR.com. And join us next time on Jesus Changes Everything.